you may be relieved that spring has finally sprung. But this green, idyllic picture belies a darker truth. Channel 4 News has been given exclusive access to the first official scientific report that shows Britain being fast altered by a changing climate and an increase in extreme weather. We've been on our own journey of Britain, visiting some of our most important habitats across the country, and found a natural world in plight. Climate has always varied, but as our 4 seasons morph into more like 2, it's the pace of change that is not just threatening the picture of Britain, but destabilising the environment which underpins our natural world.
Well, our wildlife is in crisis. In my lifetime, I've seen huge changes to the natural world. My great fear is that these things that we take for granted today will not be part of my children's lives when they grow up.
When you look at the latest conservation statistics, you can see why the last 12 months with its record-breaking extreme weather has been described as apocalyptic for wildlife. It was the worst breeding year on record for birds. Take the chaffinch, 60% fewer fledged the nest. And then came the cold snap. Many suffered, including 3 times as many barn owls perishing. The common blue butterfly was down 60%. And overall, 70% of butterfly species are in decline. Insects and bugs are facing the same magnitude of problem. And maybe this is why. We now have only 2% of our wildflower meadows left. But perhaps the most alarming statistic of all, our hedgehogs are disappearing as fast as the tiger, dropping from 36 million in 1950 to just 1 million today. The list goes on. That's why today 40 top environmental scientists have come together to publish a report telling us how Britain's biodiversity is being threatened by climate change and extreme weather. It's a wake-up call, showing that changes are already happening and taking place at an unprecedented rate. It brings together for the first time the top scientific knowledge about the scale of change and loss. It's been led by ecologist Dr. Mike Moorcroft, the head of profession for climate change at Natural England.
We can now start to see our natural environment is changing. There's really very clear scientific evidence of that. Climate change isn't just something for the future, it's happening here and now. Actually, we could be looking at quite a radical shift. The whole look of the countryside changing, the species that we find in particular places being different to what we're used to. That green and pleasant land that's become so ingrained in, I suppose, the British psyche, it's not going to be the same in future.
So what does that future look like? The report sets out key habitats that are already being impacted, areas that have seen gradual changes before, but nothing like the pace at which they are now being reshaped. Here in the Scottish Cairngorms, wildlife is clinging to the top of the world. There may be a lot of snow here right now, but just like the Arctic ice is melting, the snowbeds here are decreasing year on year. One of the key findings of the report is that these unique mountain areas are seeing the changes first. From vegetation to birds and butterflies, life is moving both northwards but also to higher altitude, seeking cooler climes. 25% of all British species under threat are based here in Scotland. Professor Des Thompson has spent his career studying the changes to these habitats.
Really, a 30-year period is a tiny snapshot, and that's what's extraordinary, how these landscapes are changing over a relatively short period of time. I mean, parts of this landscape haven't changed so much over thousands of years, and yet here we are in the lifetime of one generation of people. We're picking up changes. We've got tree line moving up, we can look at the ground around us, we're losing some of the heathery habitat, we're gaining some of the grasses, we're looking higher up, and you can just see how at the very highest area for some of these birds there's nowhere for them to go if conditions change. For birds like dotterel and snow bunting, they'll just fall off the edge.
Why do you think people should care? Why should we stand up and take notice?
You know, this is such an important part of our heritage. These are Rembrandts of landscapes. These are some of the finest landscapes you will find not just in Britain, but anywhere in the world. And it's so supremely adapted to the climate. So of course, very small changes in climate are likely to give rise to fairly fundamental changes in the wildlife we're seeing.
Those changes are not limited to the mountaintops. They are also being seen around our 12,000 miles of coast. The seabird colonies that thrive around Britain have international significance and have been compared to the ecological importance of the Serengeti in Africa, so rich are they in life. I'm here on the Farne Islands off the coast of Northumberland, which is home to 5,000 grey seals and over 80,000 seabirds. There is almost 10% of the UK puffin population here, but last year the atrocious spring spelled disaster. Over 90% of puffin burrows were flooded, drowning the next generation. Those who did survive had to battle the harsh winter, and thousands of dead, malnourished seabirds were washed ashore, unable to cope with the extreme weather. Dave Steele, the National Trust Ranger, has seen these changes during his 13 years living on this rocky outcrop, but nothing has compared to the last year.
We've had a tough 12 months. Even just within the last 5 years, we've lost 30% of our puffin population, and we're having a big decline in our shag population this winter. In March, we've had onshore winds, heavy seas for 3 or 4 weeks continuous. Seabirds have found it really difficult to actually feed, and with the low temperatures, mortality has been high, much higher than what we expected. And that was on the back of last year where we had the wettest summer on record, and things like puffins, which nest underground, they suffered really badly.
You'd imagine these birds are quite hardy. They're living on the sea cliffs, they're by the sea.
The seabirds are very long living and we can tolerate one bad year. But then, 6 months later, they've had this winter, the mortality high. That's another event. All these are just starting to add up.
These population crashes caused by extremes in weather come on top of changes due to climate too. With the seas already having warmed by ½ a degree, the plankton has moved north, taking with it the sand eels on which these seabirds feast. Food is simply moving out of reach. The thing about nature is that it's all meant to work in harmony, but one of the key concerns of the report is that the symbiosis of the natural world is starting to break down, and when one thing shifts, this causes everything else to fall out of step.
Well, we're beginning to see changes whereby different parts of the natural world are coming out of synchrony with other parts of the natural world. And we've got large amounts of changes happening. Orchids not flowering at the right time compared to when the pollinators are there. We're seeing birds not nesting when the caterpillars that they feed on are there. Hedgehogs and bats coming out of hibernation at the wrong time of year.
For centuries we've relied on the natural world working in harmony. What does it mean if this is picked apart?
Well, nature really is a huge ecosystem, and all the different parts are very closely interlinked and work together nicely like a clockwork mechanism. And although there's some flexibility, if you start to unpick it, to pull it apart, this could be really damaging for a range of different species, but also for us.
The natural world is important not only for our well-being, but we need a carefully balanced ecosystem for the world to work. Yet in the light of these fast changes, many fear we're not acting quickly enough. And that's why in 2 weeks' time, all the conservation charities will come together to launch an appeal, urging us to make saving nature a priority. Because the things we take for granted are at real danger of being lost.
Governments are already making big decisions about how to stimulate the economy, but we mustn't let short-term desire to get the economy moving again sacrifice the future of nature. We can't wait until the economy grows before we take action to save nature now.
We've long argued over whether climate change is our fault and held hope that science would find a way to fix it. But our ecology and landscapes are fast changing. The question is, do we try to save the nature we know and love, or accept an uncertain future that may leave Britain looking like a very different place?